Well, hello. I hope that this video finds you all well and continue to stay safe. I'm giving you all a different view. I'm giving you more of what the view I get when I'm standing up here on a Sunday morning. Pews aren't that empty. But, you know, this is more what we see. I want to talk to you today about Matthew 19. There's a story in Matthew 19, and it's about this rich guy, this rich dude. He wants to know what it's going to take to get into heaven. And so he goes to Jesus and he says, Jesus, what do I need to do? And Jesus says, well, you need to follow the rules, right? You need to follow, don't commit adultery, don't murder, don't steal, don't false witness, honor your mother and father also. And he goes, I do all that, Jesus, I do all that. So what else do I need to do? Because he felt that there was something else he needed to do. And Jesus says, well, I need you to go and sell all your possessions. Give them all away. Give all your money, all your riches away, and then come and follow us. The guy didn't want to hear that. That's not what he came to hear. And so he leaves grieving because he has a great deal of possessions and he doesn't want to get rid of them. And then Jesus turns to his disciples and said, truly, I tell you that it's going to be really difficult for a rich person to get into heaven. And he uses that saying it'd be just as difficult for a rich person to get into heaven as a camel to get through an eye of a needle. And the disciples are astounded and they go, who can get into heaven? And Jesus ends with, well, for you mortals, all is impossible, but for God, nothing's impossible. For mortals, it's impossible. For God, all things are possible. This November, actually All Saints Sunday, about 7 years ago, I started ministry here in Commonwealth United Methodist Church. And it's been about 7 years. I've been a local pastor. It's not a really long tenure, I will admit, but it's been long enough for me to learn a few lessons. Like, you know what, the color of the carpet does matter. It matters a lot to some people. There are, during certain times of year, everything's going to go wrong. It's just going to happen. There's just, that I will spend more time exploring and researching HVAC systems than I will looking into biblical text most weeks. A lot more time on HVAC systems than I want. That just sitting with somebody, just sitting quietly with somebody is probably the most powerful thing you can do in ministry. And that during a pandemic, everything that you've learned, all the rules that you think are well established, they go out the window. One of the things that I have learned the most since becoming a pastor is that the really hard questions, the questions that are going to make you really think, that are going to test you to your core, they're not going to come from folks sitting out in the pews oftentimes. They're going to come from folks you meet on the street. And I want to talk about this time I met this guy on the street. He was a friend. It was early on in my tenure here as a pastor, very early on. And like I said, he was a friend. And he was trying to figure out God. And here's the thing, we in the church, we often say, well, you know, those people that are outside the church, they don't really care about God. Because if they cared about God, they'd be in the church, right? That's not necessarily true. Folks out on the street are trying to figure out God as much as we are. The problem is they oftentimes think that they have to figure out God before they can come and sit in one of these pews. That's a sermon for another day, but it's true. And so this friend, this guy, he asked me this question, and he said, and it was based on Matthew 19. He said, if it's impossible to get into heaven, you know, threading a camel through the eye of a needle, if it's impossible to get to heaven being rich, why are Christians not all poor? Why don't you just give everything away? Why don't you just give it all away? And then he followed that up with a observation. He says, it seems to me the churches seem to be more concerned about money and wealth and power and prestige than they do about helping the poor or being poor themselves. He says, don't y'all want to get into heaven? And I'm like, oh, Lord, I just wanted to walk down the street. And it was a good question. It was a difficult question. And it made me realize that we got a lot of work to do in the church, that I really do wish he would come and be a part of our congregation, because we're all learning all of this about why. What is it about money that's so difficult to talk about? And now, during this time of year, it's November, I'm neck deep in stewardship issues for next year, trying to set a budget for next year, talking about salaries for next year, talking about how we're going to make it with the tithes and offerings that we have in the coming year. I'm neck deep in money, and so it really sort of hits me hard. And I think about this comment, this question in his comment. Well, don't y'all want to get into heaven? Why is it that churches seem so hung up on money? And I'm not angry with my friend for asking me that question. Although I can tell you that I wished it was at a better time in my pastoral career that he had asked me that. And the truth is that when it comes to money, we in the church, we're sort of squeamish about talking about it. We think that it's not right to talk about money, to talk about monetary and financial things, except for during stewardship season. And then we can do it, but only if we do it in a very holy and spirit-filled way, right? Well, that's wrong, actually. Jesus talks about money. He talks about money a lot, actually. He talks about how people earn it, how people spend it, who to give it away to, and whether this wage is fair. He talks about careers and working and how to earn this money and talks about money almost as much as he talks about the kingdom of heaven. And why does he do that? Why does Jesus talk about money so much? Well, I want you to think about your lives, your own lives. How many instances in your own life revolve around money? Your salary that you're making at work. And it's not just going shopping. We think, we only spend money when we go shopping. No, we talk about and think about money and our salaries. I mean, your home taxes. Often do you think about the house taxes? Are they going up? Are they going down? Are they going to stay the same? The taxes on your vehicles, on your income. I mean, April's coming, y'all. We got to get that stuff ready, right? That's money. What are we going to do for our careers? Are we going to continue an upward projection in our careers? Are we going to stay level off? Are we going to go and work for this company? That's about money, y'all. A lot of our lives, a lot of our daily lives revolve around money in one shape or form or another. This is why Jesus talks about it. I want you to take this dollar bill that I've held up. Okay, excuse me. This dollar bill, the average dollar bill has a lifespan of about 6.6 years. From the looks of it, this one's got probably another 5 years to go. On the average, in 1 year, this dollar bill will pass through the hands of 110 people. Just this dollar bill. 110 people. In its lifespan of 6.6 years, that's 726 folks this dollar bill will pass through before it gets too tattered and destroyed. Jesus talks about money because money is important in our lives. because we need to know about this money because it affects so much of our lives and touches so much of our lives. And as followers of Jesus, we need not to be afraid of this. Because remember, even if people are not coming into our churches on Sunday or ever, they are still trying to figure out God. So it would behoove us to talk their talk. So let's talk about this bill again. It will pass between about 726 people in its lifetime. Will it do good or bad? Is this dollar bill good or bad? Evil or good? The 726 people that it passes through their hands, will it cause them to do evil or good? Y'all, this dollar bill doesn't care about good or bad. It's amoral. Amoral means having no morals. Oh, that's a bad thing, right, Steve? No, it doesn't care about morals. It doesn't care about good or bad. It's a dollar bill, y'all. It doesn't have any feelings. It doesn't know what good or bad are. It's got no brain in it. Now, that's amoral, not to be confused with immoral. Immoral is having a moral compass, knowing the difference between good and bad, and choosing to do bad. Now, of the two things in your screen, me and the dollar bill, which do you think can be immoral? Which is amoral? Well, let me give you a hint. This is amoral, remember? So if this is amoral by process of elimination, that's me. We are the ones that can be immoral. So the 726 hands that this dollar bill will pass through in its lifetime, that will depend on whether or not this dollar is used for good or for bad. We are the ones that will make that decision. We are the ones that will become the moral compass of this dollar bill. Now, what if we have 100 of these dollar bills, or 1,000 of these dollar bills, or 1,000,000 of these dollar bills? Does it make a difference? No. Those dollar bills, no matter how many you have, are amoral. The people that will decide whether or not good or bad are done with the dollar bills, whether it's 1 or 1,000,000 or 2,000,000 or 3 or 10,000,000, us. The ones with the moral compass. The ones that can engage in morality. Dollar bill doesn't matter. So turning back to Matthew and the rich guy and the wanting to know whether or not he could get into heaven. And my friend who's asking me, why are you Christians, if you can't get into heaven being rich, why aren't you giving everything away? Don't you want to get into heaven? Why do you all talk about money? Or it seems like all you want is more money to fund your churches. The reality is, we get to decide how this dollar bill is spent and what it is used for, and if it's good or if it's bad. Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God, they look at us, want to be in relationship with us, right? The triune God, 3-1-1-3, wants to be in relationship with us. Looks at us, doesn't just see what we have on the outside, how we portray, how we act, what we say we do, what we think we should do, the moral things that we profess that we do, the immoral things that we do in the dark. Doesn't look at that. Looks at our heart. You see, Jesus knew when he was talking to this rich guy that this rich guy was doing all these wonderful things, following all these rules, but there was something that this rich guy loved more than God. There was something that this rich guy wanted to keep more than a relationship with God. You see, it wasn't the fact that he had riches, had money. Maybe it's easier for us to think of riches as money because that's what we think of as riches. But it wasn't the fact that he had riches, money. It was the fact that he loved those riches, that he loved his money more than he loved being in relationship with God. So much so that when Jesus said, "Go and give it all away," he grieved and would not do it and walked away from God, from God incarnate. Literally walked away from God. This is what Jesus meant by saying that it is easier for a camel to get through a needle than for a rich person to get through into heaven. What he was talking about was what was in our heart, how our hearts were functioning towards God, acceptance in God. See, it wasn't about the money. Jesus didn't give a flip about the money. Jesus cares about our heart. And so what we have to realize is that we talk about money. Jesus talked about money because it affects our every portion of our daily life. But it does not define who we are. What defines who we are in God's eyes is what's in our heart. How do we want to live our lives? And when the disciples hear this, when the disciples hear Jesus saying this, that it's easier for a camel to get through an eye of a needle than it's for a rich man, they're going, who then can get into heaven? Who can be saved? That's the question they ask. First question they ask, who then can be saved? Because they know what's in their own hearts. This is pretty darn close to it, right? And they know how can we, mere mortals, how can we ever be pure enough? How can our hearts ever be good enough to be allowed to go into the Holy of Holies, into God's presence? And Jesus goes, hey, you can't. It can't be. You can't do it. You're just mortals. But for God, all things are possible. It's not impossible for God. It's not about the money. It's about the heart. And how are our hearts going to be made pure enough, made good enough to be part of God's kingdom? We can't do it. We're not going to be able to do it. We can try. We can ask questions. We can follow all the rules. We could give away all of our money. Still not going to be able to do it, not without God and God's power. For us, it's impossible. Nothing is impossible for God. We're just mere mortals. I wish I could have tell you that I told my friend that. I think I told him something like, well, I've come to realize that everything that I own, everything that I have, every gift that I have been given, every blessing that I have been blessed with, my children, my wife, my home, my cars, my dollar bills, all of that, all of it belongs to God. It does. It belongs to God. I'd like to say that I can give it over every day without any reservations. Sometimes I'm like the rich man who goes away grieving. I'd like to say that my heart is pure enough to be in God's presence. It's not. But there's one thing that I know that I have learned in my faith. For me, it might seem impossible. To God, nothing's impossible. And so every day I wake up knowing that I'm being asked to engage in an impossible feat that I cannot possibly do on my own. and rely every single day more and more upon God's power to get my heart through that heavenly needle. One day, hopefully. And I think that's all the best we can do. It's to rely on God's power more and more every day. So my friends, my prayer for you as we go into these weeks of, is this pandemic ever going to end? How are we going to financially make it? What are we going to do next year? How are we going to do Christmas and Thanksgiving? Know that in your life there are things that are seemingly impossible. But for God, all things are possible. Nothing is impossible. And that's a message that we can take with us and live into for the rest of our lives, if we're lucky. So blessings. You are loved by a God who is so crazy about you, it's hard to imagine. Stay safe and stay well. Amen.